So first off, I'll ask a few questions, but if anyone has additional questions, start thinking about that. I'll pause in the middle and I'll open it to the platforms. Okay, so Charles, when you talk about the 25th anniversary, what are some of TNC's greatest achievements?
Well, so 25 years is a long time. We started in Palau, which is tiny but important. Really it was kind of a more happenstance or serendipity to even start and be in a place like Palau. But then over the course of 25 years to go from that tiny little initial engagement to in Palau itself now being the closest advisor to the president, but also not just in Palau, but being advisors and embedding ourselves in the cultural and social framework of places like Micronesia as a whole, or China and Mongolia and Australia and Indonesia and Melanesia. That's a big transformation. You think about the kind of success that we've had in having access to presidents and prime ministers and ministers, CEOs and community leaders across the region. That's an enormous evolution for us over the course of 25 years to establish that kind of credibility in that kind of time frame. And then providing solutions. I think the reason we were able to grow so much and to become so adept at bringing those folks to the table is because we've always come to the table with solutions, solutions to the problems of forest management or fisheries issues or climate change or rangeland management, mining issues. So that's, we're helping to provide a healthy living for people, local people, but also solving political leaders and community and corporate sector problems. So we have, I think, 25 years of bringing that kind of credibility to the table, and our track record of, solutions is significant.
And in your role, you've had the great opportunity to travel across TNC, talk to a lot of people. How do you articulate the importance of Asia Pacific as a region?
Well, it's easy, right? I mean, well, why is Asia Pacific so important? That's where all the people are, right? I come from the American West, which is probably the last settled place on the planet in terms of population base. So I grew up in a place which had a lot of elbow room, and the problems of growth and of concentration of people and resource management were very different from Asia, where you have 35 million people in a single city in China, where you have an entire river basin in Australia that doesn't reach the ocean anymore because it's being used for irrigation. The coral reefs of the Coral Triangle and Micronesia are all essentially providing 30, 40, 50%, depending on the country you're in, of the protein for people who live here. So that's those kind of the water tower of the Himalayas. It provides the fresh water for almost half the world's population. What's more, though, is not just the fact of the numbers, but the fact of the dynamism of Asia, of the thirst to develop in a different way than the West has developed. The desire to do it right is significant. So you see that across the region, where people want to skip the resource-intensive, very heavy and very destructive and polluting industries. They want to skip into a service economy, and they want to become more efficient. Now, there's lots of fits and starts on that. It's not a perfect evolution, but it's taking advantage of that kind of willingness of the Chinese and the Mongolians and the Indonesians and Australians to really learn from the mistakes of the West, to design their own development path, is the huge opportunity, I think, for us in the region.
But then, as you say, there's a lot of opportunities. So where does TNC focus, and how does that play into the GCGS and global vision?
Yeah, I think the focus, we have historical expertise in a number of areas where we can kind of come to the table immediately and say, here's what we know about this resource. Here's what we know about grassland management or timber issues and supply chain management or fisheries. And we can bring ready and quick solutions on that front. The other way to think about it, though, when you get a little discouraged and you kind of confront problems like air pollution or food safety or water pollution, where we don't have or urban issues like here in Hong Kong, where we don't necessarily have built-in historical knowledge about these programs. The other way to think about it is we have this gravity, this credibility, our position, our market position as unbiased, science-based, non-confrontational, private property rights respecting organization gives us this platform that even in areas which are new to us, like urban, like air pollution, we can come into that kind of setting and people are assured that we're going to come to the table with a constructive set of solutions, even if it takes us a little while to develop them because we don't have them in our back pockets.
And even on the concept of conservation, it has been an evolution. So have you seen a change in people's behavior or views, and has that posed any opportunities or challenges?
Oh, the evolution on environment, I've only been here in Asia for 6 years, and so you've seen it for longer than I have, but the evolution in mindsets around conservation and environment here is dramatic, and you don't see that kind of ideological shift anywhere else on the planet other than here in Asia, and that's inspiring. So, there's a great story about 2010 or 11. The American Embassy started publishing data about air quality in Beijing, and from that came essentially a series of apps that everyone in Beijing would use to determine whether they should go outside or not, or put a mask on. And then over the course of 2 or 3 years, people really got their heads around what was going on. And then just 2 weeks ago, a former journalist from the state television station put together a 2-hour documentary on air pollution, which everyone in mainland China saw. Everyone, like 1.4 billion people, saw this documentary. So much so that it was quite controversial that it got out there and was playing so much. But the government let it happen because the government knows that pollution is an issue that affects everyone, and so they're desperate for solutions as well. So this gives us a huge opportunity to step in. So you see that evolution. Think about 2011 to 2015. You go from zero knowledge, where people thought that the smog in Beijing was fog. And absolutely, people looked at it and said, "Oh, it's a little bit foggy today." And now in 2015, people know exactly what the pollutants are, exactly what they are at what time of day, and there's a huge debate in the party and in the public around what to do about it. That's 4 years. That's huge. That's an evolution that took 100 years in the West. To see that happen in 4 years, and you see that everywhere. You see that in Indonesia too. The election of the new president there, who's one of his first moves was to reform some of the fisheries policies in Indonesia that were vastly out of date, and of course he's hitting lots of rough seas on that. So forgive that, but that's a great great step forward. The political leadership is following the public's demand for more sustainable management of resources, and it's exciting to see.
Well, on a similar note, we have air pollution. That's a new space for TNC, but we also have a question about renewable energy. What's TNC stance on renewable energy? And everybody's concerned about fossil fuels, and is renewable energy something that is going to carve the way in the future?
Well, we don't have a lot of expertise on renewable energy. There's the solar, wind, hydropower is considered a renewable energy, although it has lots of impacts. All energy sources have impacts, and so what our position? We don't have positions really on anything. We have solutions for specific issues, and so for instance, in the Mojave Desert in California, rather than oppose a very large solar farm, what we did was work with the developers to develop it in a way that was going to minimize the damage to the environment in the desert. Similarly, in Mongolia, we've as the coal mines and the gold mines in the Gobi Desert have been developed, we've been at the table to help to minimize that impact. We're never going to have a position, while we prefer to have nuclear or solar. Those are the sorts of the energy mix of the future are not the sort of areas where we're going to play a huge role, but we will play a big role in how do you do that development in a way that's going to be most sustainable and least impactful on the planet.
So what's the right moment for us to go in with support the government or the private sectors? Is it our opportunity to really lead the charge in carving out the space?
On renewable energy, I think look, renewable energy is no different than any other land use, right? So we can go in at a couple of different junctures. So in Mongolia, for example, we have essentially written the entire land use map and done the entire land use baseline mapping for the country. So the Mongolian government has asked for us to do eco-regional planning for the entire country. They're using that eco-regional plan as a baseline map for their land, their permitting and land planning decisions. So that's right at the front end. Super smart, right? I mean, so then you get an enormous country, 17th, 18th, 19th largest country in the world, undergoing a huge energy boom and mineral boom. And we're at the front end able to influence the government to let them know what the baseline of their resources are, without which they'd be making permitting decisions without the full range of knowledge. So that's one area where we can go and impact that. Another area is in Western Australia, for instance, where the BHP Billiton, mining big chunks of coal, other big companies mining coal, other minerals in Western Australia, and are looking for ways to mitigate and offset their impacts. So that's sort of after or midstream in the energy development phase. We're able to step in and say, all right, here's the smartest way to spend your mitigation dollars, and to put them into these kind of long-term sustainable land management solutions. So all of these things are you can engage at any stage. One of the, we don't generally engage at the, when there's a lawsuit or a protest around something, but that's just because it's not sort of in our DNA to be in that confrontational mode.
Well, another great example is Indonesia did the thought leadership on the sector, so leading the mining charge.
Well, right. That's another great example of where our Indonesia program sees this example, sort of sector by sector, to influence the way that they think about development. And so that's Mongolia is the great example of the sort of underlying government background information. Australia is the mitigation, good mitigation example, and I think Indonesia is a great sectoral corporate example.
So here, looking in the 25th, celebrating the past, the great things that we've done, what's on the horizon for TNC?
Well, I think we can always broaden our reach. I've talked a lot about the way we finance our work here. And the thing that I've focused on to a great degree over the last 6 years of being here in Asia is making sure that we have a sustainable financing stream of funds for each of the programs we've got. And we've got, the three big continental countries that we work in: Australia, Indonesia, and China. These three countries all have the ability to and are, to a great extent, funding their own work. So what we've brought to the table is a great idea: sustainability, conservation. It's been adapted by our fantastic staffs in each of these countries. Leaders, great business leaders, government political leaders have grabbed on to that mission, and through relationships with our staffs have begun to fund our work in those countries, and in some cases beyond. So that sustainability model is really important. So that local ownership is critical, and to have that transformation happen in the last 6 years is really a dramatic deal, right? I mean, we went from a purely U.S.-funded region to now significantly funded in region. So that's one piece. The second thing we need to focus on is public funding. So funding out of Europe and the US was traditionally our bread and butter for work in the region, but increasingly Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan, Singapore governments are all interested in outbound aid and influencing the sustainability of the region. So that's a great opportunity for us. The corporate sector is another great opportunity for us, where we've probably, it's not that we've underachieved, we just haven't done a lot in that space yet in terms of cause-related marketing, corporate philanthropy, corporate partnerships on practices and policy. And so that, I think, expanding into that field provides both a revenue base for the work we do around the region, and then also a set of new solutions that we can show to others around. So for instance, our work with Rio Tinto in the Gobi on mitigation, and with BHP Billiton in the Madu lands has led to a series of engagements with other mining companies around the region, in Indonesia, in the Solomon Islands, and other places. So that's, I think, those sort of, I think about things as it's critical we have the money to do what we need to do. We know what we need to do. We just, the main issue, I think the two main issues are funding and capacity. So building local capacity and having the funding to do it are critical. And when you back off from that, okay, well, what's funding? We got to get the funding mix right. So we're headed down the right track on that front. And then from a broader perspective, I think, my view is that in 10 years or 25 years, that we're really lockstep with governments, with the corporate sector, with local communities around the region, and much bigger. Our impact is you add 3 zeros, you really scale this up significantly.
So how do we influence our stakeholders? And one of the great things is bringing them out to the field. If we were to say, where do you recommend going out to the field that would give them the best impression and diversity of Asia Pacific?
Sure, yeah. No, that's a great question. I mean, it's a huge area we cover, right? And a lot of times not that easy to get around. It takes days to get to some of our project sites. But look, the nice thing about TNC is that no matter where you go, if you're in Indiana or Indonesia, Mongolia or Montana, you go in and you meet the local staff person, and it's the same story. They're basically, they're thinking about the world the same way. Like, who are the political leaders in this area? What are the big problems? How can we add value? And that's exciting to be around for donors, both public and private donors, to be around our incredibly inspiring local staff. So my suggestion is that we find out what donors are interested in. We've got a number of itineraries that I think are pretty doable in terms of a week to 10 days, and then we just basically shut up and let the local staff do the talking, because we have the best experts on conservation in the world, and they're on the ground, in the water, and they're working to solve big problems. So, I mean, some of my favorite places. You want to know? So I grew up in Colorado, and I'm a mountains guy, mostly mountains and deserts of the West, and so I'm naturally drawn to places like the Himalayas or the Mongolian grasslands or deserts and mountains. So those are the places I like to go. And I think are very inspiring. We've got great work to show, and incredible partners on the ground in Tosen-Gulstai National Park, or in the Sichuan Land Reserve, where we're working with Tibetan people on conservation. So those are fun places for me to go. Australia, similarly, fascinating country to me because it's very deserty, and I'm a very sort of deserts. I like deserts, and I like being out there. And the history in Australia is fascinating too. To think about 200 years of a hard time for the indigenous people, and to think that we're actually playing a role in solving some of the issues around indigenous poverty and drug abuse, and bringing people back onto the land. That's inspiring stuff. Really, really fascinating. But moving to Hong Kong, I've had to kind of become a fan of the tropics, right, and the water. So I've become kind of a water guy, and so I end up doing a lot of paddling and swimming in the ocean in Hong Kong, and it's been great for me to see the work in Indonesia and Micronesia, Melanesia, around our in the corals with coastal communities and fishermen. Totally new for a guy from Colorado, but super inspiring. I mean, I can't tell you some of the folks, particularly in some of our smaller programs in Papua New Guinea, where it just blows me away that that we can get the things done that we're getting done. You know, the governor of Madang reminds me of the governor I worked for when I was living in Colorado. I worked in politics for a while. He's a very aggressive guy. He wants to get things done, and he's got the best interest of his people in mind. So that's, you take donors, whether they're public or private, folks out to Madang, and you show them this guy who's just this inspirational character, and our staff. It's really fun.
Well, but that's exactly it, because a lot of donors, they respond to heartwarming stories about the people, the communities that we've impacted. What story has really stuck with you or has inspired you from a community point of view?
Wow, there's so many stories. I remember sitting over a campfire in northern Australia and hearing the stories of an indigenous woman talk about the history of her people there, and how meaningful it was to be able to get back into these what they call onto country, and to engage and interact with the natural world in ways that they've done for so long. So that's a great story. One of our staff members, Gabriel, in Papua New Guinea, he's a PhD had been a professor, been around the world, and now he lives at the end of the road. You stop and then you walk 5 kilometers, and you have to ford a little creek, a river that up to his chest, and then you get to his house, which doesn't have any electricity in it. And he's embedded in this community in a way that nobody else can possibly be. He's got all of the, he's one of the smartest guys I've run across in the Nature Conservancy. Very worldly, but yet is able to engage with people in Papua New Guinea in a way that no one else could really do. So these are we have 350 people in this region, and there's 350 individual stories that are inspirational like that.
I remember I was on a field trip with Michael Looker and Jeff Moore and Trina, and we were sharing stories about animals. And Trina has a fantastic story about a snake, but aside from that, did you have any really fun stories about going into nature and encountering something unexpected?
I have great stories on the animal front. I tend to get myself out ahead of things a little bit too much. So whether I'm swimming or snorkeling, or out on the trails, I see a lot of stuff. One time, Abdul Halim, who's leaving us unfortunately in Indonesia, and Bill Rayner and I were snorkeling, or actually we were diving off the coast of Palau in Derawan, and we saw 18 sea turtles. They were all sleeping. They were huge. They were they were enormous sea turtles, and both of them said this the largest number of sea turtles that I've ever seen, and that was my first scuba diving. First scuba diving day ever, so it was my intro to scuba diving. Similarly, in China about 4 years ago, we were doing a tour with a bunch of TNC staff, and then some of our partners from Beijing University and from CI and WWF, many of whom were panda PhDs. And this is an area in Sichuan where you find it's panda habitat, and there's basically you never see pandas. Most of these guys have done their entire PhDs and seen pandas in the wild, maybe once or twice. And so this is my first trip to Sichuan. We go in, we park, and we say, all right, we've got 45 minutes to go for a hike up this little valley. It's kind of, go into the nature reserve. So they unlock the gate, we go across the river, and I, take a run up this valley, and lo and behold, I came up around the corner, and I saw 3 pandas. And, they were making a funny noise. They make like a sheep noise, like a ba, ba. And I kept hearing this, and I'm like, what? There's no sheep back here. They don't let farmers back in here. This is a nature reserve. And I came around the corner, and there they were. And I had my phone in my pocket, which I stupidly didn't take out. But they saw me eventually, and they scampered up the hillside. And coming back, I went over and I got pictures of their footprints, and then I got also a panda poop, which is very easy to pick up because it's just bamboo, basically. It's just bamboo. And so I brought the poop and the fingerprint or the footprints back down to the panda PhD because I knew no one would believe me. And they had to believe me because they could see that the tracks were fresh and the poop was fresh. And so that was they were very annoyed though. So that was you've never seen a group of grumpier PhDs than in that day.
How do you articulate TNC in the work with them?
Yeah, so I think, part of the question you're asking is what's the distinction between WWF and CI and TNC? And I think, look, they're part of the same family tree of organizations, and we work great with them in many, many places, and where it's really appropriate to do so, like in the Bird's Head seascape in Indonesia. We've got a very tight partnership between the three organizations. The staff have rotated around from one to the other. The funders are very interested in keeping us all together and all on the same page, and so we're very coordinated. And we're adding different value. We bring very much of a boots on the ground, a very science-oriented approach, very much coming up with specific solutions. WWF are great at the communications aspect and the education side of it. CI is great at fundraising and some of the finance work. So it's I think it's when you have those opportunities, we take them. Look, there's no reason to be competitive in a negative way with groups like that. We've got the job is too big to be negatively competitive. So I think we're very complementary when we need to be. When there's no real reason to have one of us in the room, then we're pretty well coordinated wherever we work. I know in Indonesia, Trina and Bill know all of their counterparts at CI and WWF, and similarly in Mongolia and Indonesia and China and other places. In fact, I think we actually share office space in some of our programs with WWF. So I think it's not enough of us conservationists to go around and solve these problems. So we've got to figure out how to leverage and make 1 + 1 = 3. And TNC plus WWF needs to equal more than just the two of us separately.
So as a long-term conservationist, what inspires you most about your work?
Well, the people I mentioned before, I get my energy from being out in nature and engaging and trying to understand the natural world in more deep ways. And I do that in ways that not a lot of people do, and that's important for me. But when I talk and think about conservation and how we are impacting the places we work, it always comes back to the people, our partners and our own staff, who are so talented and so dedicated, who really have the best way I've been able to describe this is they have a deep patriotism for their place, a very strong feeling of love for the place they are and for what it does for the people that they work and live with. E.O. Wilson calls it biophilia, which is a love of nature. I think it's like that. It's deeper than a love. It's a very intense understanding of the natural world and what role it plays in sustaining us all. And that's all of our people are like that. It's kind of our religion. And so when you run across those folks and they can unpack that problem that they have and then talk about the solutions they've got, it's super inspiring.
So do we have any other questions online? Nobody from the conference call? Okay, so let me wrap up then with the final question. So complete the sentence. In the next 25 years, I would like TNC to be.
Well, I think bigger, better, stronger, faster, right? I think we're absolutely on the right track. We have clear, smart goals in all of our projects. We've got the right kinds of contacts. We just need to put more fuel in those fires to make them happen. So that means, again, back to the sustainable financing, great ideas, great solutions that we're bringing to the table, and a broad base of support. So in 25 years, we should be the go-to partner for the CEO community around the region for solutions to their sustainability and natural resource management problems. We're already the go-to partner for many of the governments and ministers around the region. We should have that be a universal. And I think the gravity of the Nature Conservancy will gradually shift to where it needs to be most. The U.S. is great. I love our programs in the U.S., but we're understaffed. And in 25 years, I think we'll be just as big as we are in the U.S. Here in Asia Pacific, and reaching that kind of influence level, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, geography by geography, project by project that we've made in the U.S.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charles, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll have a second session in April with a different theme. Stay tuned for ASMAR, and CV will send you the latest meeting invitation.
Thanks, and thanks for joining us all. I think this will be recorded and available for you all to use for whatever purposes. Thanks. Bye.